The COVID-19 pandemic is the trauma of our age. But was it the disease itself or how we responded to it?
There were documents, there were written, there were laws, there were edicts. They were coming from somewhere.
Thousands of questions demand answers.
Where is the randomized control trial for the lockdown?
Why weren't more voices at the table?
Somebody is starting to recognize that this was a huge mistake.
Which begs the question,
if another pandemic came, would we make the same mistakes?
so what happens next?
The media needs to be exposed.
Until you fix big tech.
We mustn't get used to this.
We need apologies.
Hello and welcome to a very special The Nation Speaks. I'm your host, Cindy Drucker. Today, part 2 of our two-part series, COVID-19, A Reckoning. Last week, we looked at the state of the nation in COVID's wake. How is today's world different from the one we left behind in December 2019? It's clear we're worse off, but what can we do about it? Today, we raise tough questions few have thought to ask, and we talk to the people at the forefront of charting a better future.
After 2 years of living with the pandemic, we all know what happened, but do we know why it happened? How are decisions made? For Brownstone Institute founder Jeffrey Tucker and others, it's critical to get answers because we have to first reckon with the past if we hope to chart a better course for the future.
Why weren't the economists ever consulted in the lockdowns? I mean, how come people did not do cost-benefit analysis of this sort of thing? How did it happen that the trigger was pulled to close all the schools in the country on one day? Almost every HR department in the country got delivered to them a complete list of essential and unessential workers. The same sheet of paper. Who is responsible for that? There's never any names on these documents. Why did every single hospital in the country, without exception, on one day, decide that they would serve only COVID patients and nobody else? Was it just panic? I don't believe that. When you panic, you do crazy, insane things. There were so many aspects of this thing that seemed to be organized. There were documents, they were written, there were laws, there were edicts, and they were the same all over the country. They were coming from somewhere, and there was some mechanism of control.
And in the panic, why were basic public health principles forgotten? Raising another set of questions, says well-being economist Paul Friedrich.
Where is the randomized control trial for the lockdowns? Where was the randomized control trial for social distancing, closing the borders, for masks, for forcing people in old homes not to have their families visit, for dividing the workforce into essential and non-essential? Where is the RCT for that? Well, they don't exist. It was made up. Did that follow the laws, the regulations, and the habits and the knowledge of that time? And if not, what's the culpability? Are we looking at criminal culpability, or are we just looking at, as it were, administrative malfeasance, forms of corruption, right? What was the influence of money in this? You know, were decisions bought in some way?
We can document one source of influence, China. That's where the virus came from, and the model for lockdowns. In mid-February 2020, the World Health Organization and the Chinese Communist Party organized a trip for officials from the US and elsewhere to learn from the CCP how to plan the next steps in response to the ongoing outbreak of COVID-19, including readiness and preparedness for geographic areas not yet affected. The CCP sold their winning formula for beating the virus.
How did you do that? Well, we locked everybody in their homes. It was very strict, very severe, but the Communist Party knows right. We know best, and because everybody complied, the virus is gone.
But how independent and rigorous was the fact-finding if half of the 25 delegates were from China?
It's the unanimous assessment of the team that they have changed the course of this outbreak. What was a rapidly escalating outbreak has plateaued and then come down faster than one would have expected if we had looked at the natural dynamics of an outbreak like this.
But what did they see? Here's what the team lead replied when asked why he wasn't wearing a mask after just coming back from China.
I never had any exposures. We are careful and we run careful. We have no contact with patients. We have no contact with close contacts. We have no contacts with contacts.
Meanwhile, over in Italy, cases were exploding. Dr. Bhattacharya, professor of medicine at Stanford University, says that point of comparison set the stage for the decisions that followed.
Comparing those two, this strict lockdown policy in China, much less strict policies in Italy, they concluded, including many world leaders and public health leaders, that the lockdown was the right way to go.
While the lockdowns clearly came from China, there was another piece of the puzzle that didn't make any sense to Dr. Bhattacharya, a leading expert in epidemiology and public health policy.
Tony Fauci's National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Disease seemed to put all its eggs in the vaccine basket and put much less effort in evaluating early treatment. And in fact, one of the problems was that early treatment became this politicized thing, right? So if you believed in early treatment, somehow you were a Republican. If you didn't believe in early treatment, then you were a Democrat, which is a very odd thing. The right thing to do would have been to invest in all of the above.
But that didn't happen, particularly evaluating inexpensive generic drugs. And doctors who did were punished.
Looked to me from the outside as if that people were worried that if there was an early treatment developed quickly, then maybe the demand for the vaccine would get cut. When the early treatment became politicized, physicians that were trying new things out, it essentially became a political act just to treat a patient.
Therefore, official policy became the only acceptable position, enforced through media censorship and smear campaigns against alternative views. When Dr. Bhattacharya and two other globally respected colleagues published their Great Barrington Declaration calling for focused protection of those most at risk, they were immediately attacked.
4 days after we wrote the Great Barrington Declaration, Francis Collins, who's that was then the head of the National Institutes of Health, the boss of Tony Fauci. Francis Collins wrote an email to Tony Fauci calling me, Sunetra Gupta, and Martin Kulldorff fringe epidemiologists. Then he asked Tony Fauci to ask him if there had been a devastating published takedown, literal words, he said, of the premises of the declaration, to which Tony Fauci replied with an article published in Wired magazine. I think a lot of the press attention, negative press attention we got, I think was engineered by Tony Fauci and his deep connections with the press.
We know that Fauci and Collins ordered a hit against these guys, but how deep was this? How far was it? How did the censorship begin? And why has it lasted so long? And what does that say about our media? How is it that all the companies I once celebrated as a source of emancipation became voices for regime priorities, which we know were following the CCP law?